Oh, there was something crazy that just happened back there. Anyway, look, I am trying very hard. I've been spending a lot of money, but I can't give gifts to everyone, unfortunately. But I've been trying very hard to spread the love of the kingdom, to welcome other people into the kingdom. Now, I can't welcome people into the kingdom directly. Anything done through me is done through me, not by me. And by the way, that is an incredibly important distinguishment to make, because there are a lot of people out there who think, I did this, I did that, I converted this person, I saved this person, blah, blah, blah. No. We don't bring people into the kingdom. We don't save people, etc. And for those, a lot of people think that the Mahoto of Adonai, our God, Eloheinu, of Hashem, a lot of people think that the kingdom is just something that comes after death. Now, we do seem to have verification from the scriptures, from the good news of Yohanan and Mattisyahu, Matthew and John, and others, right? As well as Lucas and we also have the letters, the Pauline letters, etc. We do seem to have confirmation that the Pharisees were right about the resurrection, right? By the way, a lot of us still lean in heavily on the Talmud, you know, as a way to attempt to, you know, interpret the way things should be done. You know, a lot of us don't just rely solely on, you know, like we rely on how other people interpret the Torah to some extent as well, right? We see how Rabbi Yeshua seems to interpret certain aspects of Torah. You know, we also, you know, we might also look to the Talmud. We might look to other historic figures like Maimonides and Rabbi Akiva, the Baal Shem Tov, the Rambam. Why? Well, because whether or not we place, like most Yehudim, most of Ha-Yehudim, most of the Jews, most of my brothers and sisters in the world today that recognize their Jewish, you know, their Jewish history, recognize themselves as Jews. Most Jews who identify as Jews do not accept Rabbi Yeshua. For those who don't know, I'm talking about Lord Jesus. Most do not accept Rabbi Yeshua. Most do not accept Rabbi Shaul, St. Paul. Welcome, Dav. Most do not, and then a lot of Messianics don't accept Maimonides or the Rambam or the Baal Shem Tov as, you know, 100% authentic or 100% legitimate sources. But when it comes to any ancient Jewish source, or any ancient source in general, we can know more about the cultural context, cultural history, etc. We can glean glimmers of the transference of tradition and oral history, and even think about the access to the texts that the Rambam, or that even as late as the Baal Shem Tov, the texts that they would have had access to that we don't have access to, at least in the public domain today. A lot of ancient texts and a lot of ancient traditions are either behind closed doors, or a lot of these ancient texts are like in private collections. A lot of these oral traditions are held by very few people, maybe in like you know, Bedouin tribes that have maybe kept some of the traditions, and so on and so forth. The vast majority of publicly available information to our past has been lost. So if we look at ancient sources that are popular, we might have a better understanding of a lot of the lesser, or might come closer to lesser known realities about our faith, about our ancestry. You know, going back all the way, not just to Yisrael, not just to Avraham, but maybe all the way back to Shem, who is the common ancestor to all of us Semites, Semitic peoples. The Akkadians, us Jews, the Arabs, the Mandeans, I don't think the Yazidis trace ancestry back to Shem, but I don't know. But in any case, what's up, everybody? What's up, everybody? How you guys doing? What's up, Nasir? What's up? I see Ty. I see someone's name in Ty. What's up? I don't I can't read Thai. I can see, I know what it looks like because I have had a lot of Thai friends. I haven't been to Thailand yet though. But yeah, so like when we look back on our ancestry, we like any tradition, any kind of ancient historic text, they had access to things oftentimes that we just don't have access to anymore in the public domain. I mean, even if you look up Beowulf, if you look at the original photocopy, like Beowulf has been photocopied, but it costs what, like $400, $600 to get like a book that has the photocopies. You can only see the first page online. You can't. We don't even have free access to every page of Beowulf, which to me should be public domain to all English speakers around the world because it was written in Old English, you know. And if you don't know about Beowulf, it's what way go to they nine, go to the egum, vead kuninga thrunga frunen. That's English. That's English. That is English. And that's where people think thee and thou, that's Old English. No, they didn't say thee, they said they. They didn't say, I bid you, or sorry, they didn't say I bid thee. They said, ich bitte thee. Old English and early modern English are two separate things, and sometimes people think that Old English is Elizabethan English or early modern English. Not the same thing. No, 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 no. But anyway, confusions aside, when it comes to our ancient history, we just don't have public, you might have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to get access to some of these things, to get a better glimmer into our past, whereas some of these ancient writers might have already had access to those things, and if we don't have thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars at our disposal, at the very least we can research these things. So the Rambam, Rabbi Akiva, Maimonides, the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Shaul. These people are clear sources. Whether you agree with any one of these people as being divinely inspired or having authority in a traditional sense, at the very least, there's a good chance they were drawing from people who did have authority, or from people who, going back far enough, had authority. And there's hopefully, at least in many of these texts, at least a glimmer of truth. That's academia. That is historical analysis when it comes to understanding our history, our traditions, especially in Judaism, Arab culture, Mandean culture, etc. I mean, look at the Mandeans. These are Semitic people who believe that John the Baptist, Yohanan the Immerser, was the Mashiach, the Messiah, the Anointed One. And they're alive to this day, but their whole class of priests were all killed. I think it was like a sickness they got. They all died. And they had to reestablish the priest class, but a lot of those traditions, those oral traditions, got lost. We do what we can to reestablish ancient traditions sometimes. And it's amazing how much, even if we lose a lot sometimes, how much of our traditions remain. And we do the best we can with what we have. And that is, that when it comes to culture, oftentimes in culture, that's the best we can do. And we do our best. When it comes to like trying to reestablish biblical Hebrew, and Paleo Hebrew and Proto-Sinaitic, etc., what do we go to? Well, there are a lot of people speculate that the Yemen Hebrew is potentially the most preserved. The Yemenite Jews have very unique traditions which could indicate more ancient ones, and the wa sound often transfers to a va sound over time, and it's thought that they say wa instead of va because of a more ancient tradition. Of course, we also have to consider that the opposite might have happened, that va might have eventually become wa, and because they lived among Arab speakers in an Islamic part of the world, that they might have picked up the wa from their Arabs, brothers and sisters. Although I do wonder, I would like to know, I haven't really looked this up yet, but I want to know if our Arab Jewish brothers and sisters, if Arab Jews have a history of using the wa instead, because they also obviously spoke Arabic and lived among, Arabic speakers. If you look in the Quran, and you look in the Hadith, you know that, in early Islam, going back as far as Muhammad, that there were Arabic Jews. We know that, it's part of history. We know that there, a lot of people would call them Mizrahi. Sometimes when I say Mizrahi Jews, I'm often referring to Jews that never left Israel, that were there the whole time. But a lot of people, when they say Mizrahi, mean anybody in the Middle East and Middle Asia, that any Jews that just never left. But then that wouldn't account for like the Babylonian Jews of Iran, that wouldn't account for the Yemeni Jews. Like these Jews are clearly, I think, distinct from the Jews who never left Israel for how long has it been? What, 3,500 years or whatever it's been? You know, so like, if we don't find a way to distinguish between Israeli Jews that never left home and other Middle Eastern Jews, I feel like linguistically we're at a bit of a hard place, right? Because I gotta catch my breath. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, there are a lot of people who just have this idea of history. They don't know history very well, and they think that Jews just started coming into Israel from outside and that we weren't there the whole time. No, there were Mizrahi Jews in Israel the whole time. Now, Ashkenazi Jews started coming in large droves, and then eventually African Jews did as well. And a lot of people think that we're a religion. Now, we have the occasional convert, but it's a welcoming into the tribe. So for Jews and Arabs and other people who come from Bedouin tribes back in the day, we were divided into different tribes. So you had the Hebrew tribes, the 12 sons of Israel. Yisrael, he had 12 sons, and his descendants divided into 12 tribes. But even of the tribe of the tribe of Levi, you had members of the descendants of Levi who were among the Jews, who were of the tribe of Manasseh, etc. Because the Levites were the priestly class. So presumably the other tribes I would presume at times, the Jewish tribe welcoming in the Levites. But by the way, a lot of times people these days will often refer to all of the 12 tribes of Israel as Jews, but not everybody says that. The most obviously universal term for the members of the 12 houses of Israel would be the 12 tribes would simply be seed of Israel, meaning descendants of Israel. Because if you're a descendant of one of his 12 sons, then you're a descendant of him as well, and we're all united in that common ancestor. So whether you're of the B'nai Manasseh tribe in India, or whether you're a descendant of Levi, or whether you're a descendant of Judah, the Jews, whether you're a descendant of Benjamin, etc., you're a descendant of Israel. So we often say seed of Israel when referring to any descendant of Israel, and that also helps to clarify things too. Because if you're a seed of Israel, but you didn't grow up in the ethnic traditions of the culture, and if you never picked it up later in life, especially, but you're still a seed of Israel. You're still a descendant, right, of that man. Just like the Arabs, aka the Ishmaelites, are descendants of Ishmael, etc. Right? Like the northern kingdom of ancient Israel, and they're still here today. Like the Samaritans. Samaritans are another Semitic people, and they're not often associated with the tribe of Judah. They're not often called Jews, but they are seed of Israel, and they do have their own version of Torah. And they do have a more ancient, or a form of written Hebrew that's more associated with I think it's more associated with Paleo Hebrew, honestly, because or biblical Hebrew, because if you look at biblical Hebrew and you look at the modern Hebrew alphabet is not it was developed later, much later. I think it was during the Second Temple Judaism that the modern Hebrew alphabet was designed. But yeah, the Samaritans keep more in line with that, which we don't always see that. Sometimes we do, because even in many contexts, even the Latin alphabet has been modernized to incorporate Greek letters. Which, modern English, by the way, if you ever wonder why English spells things so oddly, why you have to memorize so many English words, and by the way, in Chinese Mandarin, you have to memorize how to spell a lot of things as well. Memorization isn't unique to English speakers and writers. But if you ever wonder why our words are not phonetic, why in Spanish or French, which both come from Latin, why when they write something, it actually sounds like what it looks like, and English is so often not that. Why? Because we don't use the English alphabet. We use the Latin alphabet with a couple of letters, with some letters, X, Y, Z, a few letters borrowed from the Greek alphabet. In fact, in Spanish, Y is called Y. E is their is what they call I, and then Griega is Greek. E Griega. E Greek, the Greek I. They're calling it the Greek I. So the Spanish have that, that preserved. Like they just call it the Greek I. They recognize that it's not native to their linguistic history, that it was borrowed. But in English, the oldest English alphabet is the runic alphabet. Right, the various runic alphabets, those are the English alphabets. And you can go even as far back as Old English with Beowulf. That form of written Old English, they were using Latin letters. They were using the Latin alphabet, but there were certain sounds that they couldn't make with the Latin alphabet, like wah and th. So what do? They borrowed from the runic alphabet and incorporated it into the Latin alphabet. So if you read a photocopy of Beowulf, not a modern transliteration, not a modern transcription, but the original Beowulf, the original actual text that was written down, what was it, like 1,500 years ago or whatever it was, you will see runes amidst the Latin letters. You'll see wind and you'll see thorn, which are from the actual original, or at least earlier, the actual native English alphabet. So if you read it froze for a second. From the Unglish alphabet, the language of the Ungles, and of course also the Saxons and the Jutes. But yeah, Unglish, the language of Ungleland. And why is it Ungleland? Well, the Ungles were there. The Angles lived in Angleland, and they spoke English. And they had their own alphabet that had sounds for their phonemes. And then you had people who were using the Latin alphabet come over, and they used that one. They transliterated English into the Latin alphabet. So when you and transliteration is not a perfect art, There's here's an example, by the way. Some people will take the Arabic term Allah and they will transliterate it A-L-L-A-H. But then in Spanish, it's A-L-A-A, A-L-A. And then in Hebrew, they don't believe they have something to indicate the very different ending from the beginning, right? Because Allah does not have the same sound at the ending as it does at the beginning. But I believe in Hebrew, it's usually transliterated as Aleph, Lamed, Aleph. But then, of course, in Arabic, it's Aleph, Aleph, Lam, Ha. Not Aleph, Lam, Aleph, Aleph, Lam, Ha. So, transliteration is not a perfect art. And since it's not a perfect art, nor a perfect science, transliteration from one language into another, from one written language into another, what's the result? What is the consequence of that? Well, modern English is a great example because we don't use the English alphabet anymore. And look at all those transliterations into the Latin alphabet and then borrowing some from the Greek. Now you have a language where you have to memorize how to spell words because words are not written as they sound. They're not phonetically, there's not a precise phonetic agreement. In terms of plurals, some plurals are borrowed from Latin, some are borrowed from Greek, some I think actually do go back to the Old English. And then you just have all these different, and of course, it wasn't just the Ungles speaking Unglish, it was also the Saxons and the Jutes. So you had different tribes, speaking different dialects, and it's just a modge podge of a mess. And modern English also borrows from Arabic. Also, like Arabic numerals are a good example. Also borrows from Sanskrit. If you ever use the word karma, that comes from that ancient language. It also borrows all over the place. It's just all over the place. When you have a language like that, yeah, spelling is going to be a bit off. Now, Spanish is so precise in its rules because, of course, Latin was, and it comes from Latin, that if a new word is introduced, they know how to pluralize it. They know how. The rules are just so set in stone, basically. You know, if it ends with Z, change the Z to a C and add ES. You know, if it ends in eon, you pluralize it with an ES, and then many plurals are just S. You know every scenario in Spanish. You know, it's not foot and feet and cat and cats. There is a precise ending for everything in Spanish, period. Because it comes from Latin. And even though it comes from I believe the vulgar Latin, the Latin of the common folk, there was a great push to keep the traditions of the Latin language, to keep it organized, to keep it grammatically fluent, in a way that structured, in a way that ensured that things went the right way. Now, in modern Romance language, you have that consistency, but you don't have. English doesn't come from a giant empire where consistency was valued by people who were rich and had a lot of spare time. English comes from a bunch of with citizens who often didn't know how to read or write, even in the runic alphabet. And historically, had a lot of coding we don't have that level of consistency and uniformity in English for a lot of reasons, for a large, substantial quantity. By the way, I'm about to leave. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Shalom Aleichem wa Assalamu Alaikum. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Take care, y'all.